to find healing. Mother Earth takes in the rain, like your heart takes my voice. Let us free each other with our prayers, with our voice.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Carolyn Oselinek, and I want to welcome all of you to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of the Rappahannock. We are a fellowship that enthusiastically welcomes all equally. We are committed to providing a safe haven in difficult times, and we are dedicated to exploring challenges we face as a society and taking action to address these challenges. We make common cause with all who want to make our world a better, fairer, healthier, and happier place. We honor each other and our planet and recognize that spirituality at its most meaningful requires that we put our beliefs into action. We're especially grateful to our outstanding members that assist us to do the work necessary to sustain and grow our fellowship and make a real difference. We're delighted to hear today from my husband, Eddie Correia, who will talk about how to find peace in a troubled country, a topical subject if ever there was one. Announcements are in the bulletin. A special welcome to first-time visitors. Please stay for refreshments after the service and take part in the continuing conversation. If ever there were time for a candle in the darkness, this would be it. Using a spark of hope, kindle the flame of love, ignite the light of peace, and feed the flame of justice. As I was looking for opening words for this morning, I was surprised and delighted to see this short quote from former Senator Bob Kerrey. Unexpected kindness is the most powerful, least costly, and most underrated agent of human change. And now from Elizabeth Stevens. For many years, I served on a healthy congregations team in the Pacific Northwest. Our task was to support congregations engaging in conflict in a healthy way. Because I'm someone who tends to see patterns, it didn't take long for me to realize that when hard and heartbreaking things were happening in the wider world, conflicts erupted more often and people were less able to be creative and compassionate as they sought reconciliation and resolution. I developed a theory. When we feel distressed and powerless in the face of current events, some people tend to turn towards spheres where we do have power and exert it in unhealthy ways. Other folks, already harboring raw nerves and bruised hearts, find themselves more sensitive than usual and prone to reaction rather than thoughtful and caring response. It's a recipe for disaster. When I floated my theory to leaders embroiled in conflict, a lot of heads nodded. More importantly, shoulders relaxed and stances softened. Just realizing that the energy behind the conflict is distress rather than aggression or dislike made a lot of difference. In these times where so many hard and horrible things are happening in our nation, I'm reminded of this pattern. My heart echoes a refrain gifted to me by a wise leader in my own congregation, one who died several years ago. Quote, sometimes some people need a little extra grace. It seems to me that right now we all need a little extra grace. We need to offer ourselves extra grace and tend to our own ragged nerves and bruised hearts. We need to offer each other extra grace, pausing before reacting, offering and receiving apologies liberally. Most importantly, we need to remember that we're all in this together. It's a waste of energy to engage in fruitless conflict. And now is a time when every iota of love we have is needed to soothe the many hurts in our broken and beautiful world. And now Eddie will talk about how to find peace in a troubled country. I think almost everyone here knows Eddie, but just let me say briefly that he is an attorney in Washington, D.C., and also an adjunct professor of law at American University's Washington College of Law. So Eddie, please come up.
This is, thank you, Carolyn. This is from the 23rd Psalm, the Revised Scientific Version. My mind is my shepherd. It gives me the strength to do what is right. It gives me the compassion to love those around me and to forgive my enemies. It allows me to be merciful to those who despise me. It leads me beside the still waters. It enables me to see the beauty of the world. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for my mind gives me courage and hope. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, for I find peace within myself. I see beauty in nature, and I receive love from those around me. I don't want to be too political this morning, but it's sort of hard not to be somewhat political. So I apologize in advance if this is too political. I don't like the president. I didn't vote for him. However, I realized if you did, there was a rational argument for voting for either candidate. So I don't think that everybody that voted for Trump was racist or homophobic or anything of the kind. Got a few words, I think, of comfort. The first one is don't overread the election. It is true we are a very polarized country, but there was no mandate. That word mandate is usually used to mean a substantial majority of voters. There was no mandate to eliminate the civil rights laws or to ban gay marriage or to ban abortions or to deny transgender people care, to eliminate environmental protection, to undermine democracy, to raise tariffs. I mean, a lot of things maybe some people want, but there was no mandate for that. The final popular vote, Trump had 77.2 million, Harris had 75 million, 49.8% to 48.3%. The margin in the 3 states that swung the election were a total of about 225,000 out of 155 million cast. So it was a close election. The electoral vote wasn't as close as the popular vote, but it was still a close election. What did the country vote for? It didn't vote for massive tariffs. It didn't vote for abandoning Ukraine. Didn't vote for cozying up to Putin. It did not vote for the undermining of the rule of law. There was a lot of frustration about inflation, a lot of frustration about the border, perfectly understandable. But I think that was the sentiment probably that turned the election, not these other things. I'm not saying people don't support those things that we have a lot of trouble with, but it's not most of the country. Things could have been different if President Biden had decided after the after the midterms to step down. We would have had a primary, would have had a competition for the nominee. Who knows who would have come out of that process? Maybe Kamala Harris, maybe somebody else. But inevitably, I think that primary would have been about change. What do we need to do that's different? That's not the way the election proceeded. I think that's probably a very unfortunate development in our country's history. But my basic point is that the majority of people in this country, they're not evil, they're not racist. They don't want to undermine democracy. So point number one is don't lose faith in the American people. Point number two is about our constitutional system. It is structured to be resilient. It's structured to avoid having a particular faction have power over the rest of us. The framers, who were brilliant in a lot of ways and had to just come up with their own theory of how this was going to work, it did invent a very resilient system, I think. Now, one aspect of that system is there are a lot of centers of power in the United States. There's states, there's Congress, there's the White House, there are the courts, and so forth. The checks and balances theory is that one branch will not dominate over the other branches. We have a situation now that is somewhat unique, I believe, at least in my lifetime, where not only one party has control of three branches of government, that has happened before, but I think a group of people who I would consider a very hardcore supporters of the president tend to be the dominant force in one party. And therefore, members of that party, if they want to get reelected, tend to be beholden to that group. And that group, unfortunately, is somewhat extreme. Now, there are other ways of offsetting that system, that result, but that's a unique political dynamic that I don't think we've seen. I don't think in my lifetime, certainly. What it means is that a lot of people in the president's party who oppose his policies still don't speak up, still don't assert their authority. And in particular, Congress doesn't assert its authority. So what the framers envisioned was if the executive gets too powerful, Congress will offset it. If Congress is not asserting its authority, that theory breaks down. So the checks and balances in Washington is not what the framers envisioned, Congress checking the president, but two parties at odds with each other, trying to check each other. The framers didn't really imagine that, in part because they didn't really imagine political parties. Now, there is another branch of government, which is the courts, and that is the other check. Courts are independent, in theory. They're not political. Judges take an oath to defend the Constitution, just like everybody else does. And what we hope is that they use whatever their legal theory is and whatever their methodology is, and their different competing methodologies, but they do it based on that. They do it based on their sincere approach of their methodology rather than a political party. Now, I'm realistic enough to know that that doesn't necessarily hold true every time. I was very naive. Even after I was a law professor and practiced law, I was sort of naive when Bush v. Gore came up. And it turned out that was probably a very political decision. It made me somewhat more realistic. Carolyn was more realistic than I am. I don't want to use the word cynical, but realistic. Uh, but, that's not supposed to happen at the Supreme Court level. Not supposed to happen at the lower courts, although it's more likely at the lower courts because it's clearly a more political process to become a district court. But you look around and there have been political decisions. I don't want to deny that. Judge Cannon's decision about dismissing the documents case was pretty political. It's hard to give any credibility to her legal theory. The Trump immunity decision, that seems to be pretty political too. I taught that class to my case to my class the other day. And you go through it in detail, it's somewhat disturbing, really. But I don't think that is the broad perception we ought to have of the courts. I am more optimistic about the courts. Several recent orders, certainly at the district court level, to enjoin actions. We haven't had too many wind their way up to the Supreme Court yet, but we will. We had a couple in the last few days. One was to really, although the Trump administration is maybe resisting it, to return someone from El Salvador. Use the word facilitate, could have been better choice of words, but that was the bottom line. Other Supreme Court decisions also hopeful. So I am cautiously optimistic, I underline the word cautious, about the court's role in our country at the moment. The president has to comply with the court order for the whole system to make any sense. And we haven't reached that point yet. We're right up to the line on it. If the president refuses to comply with a court order, we're in trouble. I'm just hoping that's not going to happen. I'm hoping that if we get to that point, then members of Congress on the Republican side will begin to assert themselves. We'll see. I hope we don't get there. I'm cautiously optimistic we won't get there. The next point is that there are elections coming up, and not sooner than you think. People are already starting to figure out who's going to run in 2026. If the elections were held today, I would guess the Democrats would take the House. We just don't know what's going to happen a year and a half from now. But that's one of the great things about the country, is that we do have regular elections. We don't call them off, The president can't postpone them. They're going to happen. And they're going to be run by the states, pretty much. States have control of elections. So there is a very good chance that the world was going to look a lot different in November of 2026 than it does right now. It won't change some of the fundamentals, probably won't change control of the Senate, certainly won't change control of the White House, but it's going to change the dynamic in Washington. So I think it's good to look forward to that because it's going to come quicker than you think. And then there's another election in 2028. And at that point, we have the potential of really major changes in the system. Fundamentally different directions for the country. So I'm not too terribly pessimistic, let me say, about the future. I'm distressed about the present. There's one thing about to be depressed about the present and lose hope for the future, which we should not do, and I don't think need to do. Now, what do you do in the meantime? The point of this talking about the positive aspects is to try to encourage you not to obsess about what's going on in Washington, because if you obsess about Washington, what's going on in Washington, you're not going to enjoy your life. And that's a big mistake. And, if you spend all of your time worrying about what's going to be on the news the next day, you're not going to find peace. And I'm old enough to realize I don't have that many years to go, and I don't want to spend all those years feeling distressed and depressed about our country. So what do we need to do? Well, we need a strategy. Hope alone is not a strategy. Hope is always essential to a strategy, but it's not sufficient. Now, one possibility is just to engage in denial or try to ignore everything. And I don't think that usually works too well for very long. I know I've cut down on the news a lot, but I just feel like I can't turn off the news altogether. So I think most of us are going to find ourselves in a situation where denial doesn't work, and trying to remain blissfully ignorant is going to work. It gives us a brief respite, perhaps, but that's not really a workable strategy. So I think that realistically, you have to turn inward or turn outward or both. Let me talk about turning outward first. One way is to try to make things better. That's what these marches are about. The good thing about it is that taken together as a group of thousands of grassroots organizations around the country, it does have a chance of making things better. So it's not a matter of just bringing peace to you for participating in it. It can make a difference. So I don't want to understate that. Contributing to political candidates, writing letters, and so forth. Those things are worth doing. But we have to be realistic about that. Have to be realistic about what a march in Kilmarnock can do. Or a letter to Congressman Whitman where you get a warm response. That's what's going to happen for the most part. So if you go into it thinking and hoping and expecting immediate results, you're not gonna see them. So again, I don't want to downplay those efforts. I just want you to go into them realistically, thinking what they're going to do. Now, another way to turn outward is really not a political reform strategy, but it's to turn outward to other forms of making life better for people. There are all kinds of opportunities. There are opportunities here in the UU. There are opportunities in our community, social justice communities. And the good thing about those is you do see results. And you can see them pretty quickly. So those forms of turning outward are constructive for you, the participant, and for the people around you who are helped. Then I want to talk about turning inward. What does that mean, turning inward? Well, it means compartmentalizing to some extent. That's a fancy word for trying to not think about something for a while that you don't like and think about something positive. But somehow you have to be able in your own mind to concentrate on things that bring you joy and bring you peace. Now, I've talked about this idea of concentric circles before, but I think it's useful to think about those. Imagine you are in the middle of a series of concentric circles. They go out from you and into the wider world. And that very first circle is you, is your mind. And you are alone in that circle. It can be a beautiful thing or it can be a terrifying thing, but it has the great potential for liberation. Well, you remember the reading where I did steal from the 23rd Psalm, but if you think about the modern version of that, rather than the Lord is my shepherd, think about your mind as a shepherd. And how can you find peace there? Some of you are much better than I am with meditation, reflection, reading. But it's just you, and no one else has access to that unless you want to give it to them. Now, the next circle, I think, is nature, but it's your interaction with nature, just the two of you, just you and nature. And the beautiful thing about that is that it's always there. And it's widely available. Doesn't have to cost anything. If you spend $1 trillion going up one of these space flights, that's expensive. That's a pretty elaborate way to get to interact with nature. Most nature doesn't cost you anything. It just says go outside and experience the outdoors. Now, those are the two circles that you have readily available to you. The next circle starts a whole band of circles which have to do with your relationships. And the very first circle is your most intimate people in your life, your partner, maybe your children. But they're a source of constant joy if you allow that to happen. And they are the way you're going to find peace most directly. And the good thing about the relationships is that as you find peace and joy with those relationships, they also help you with those two inner circles. They make those more meaningful to you. And you always do have to go back to that inner circle when you go to bed at night. That's just you. And how you think about your life, how you think about the country, that's what you're going to think about. And you're going to think about the distress in our country, but you're also going to have the opportunity to think about how you can find peace there. Now, I want to read something because this is Palm Sunday, and we haven't talked about Palm Sunday. Interesting essay in the New York Times this morning. I don't know if any of you saw it. It was a Episcopal priest. But the point was that when Jesus came to Jerusalem for Palm Sunday, it wasn't just like a ceremonial thing. It was a protest. Because at the same time Jesus was entering Jerusalem from one side, Pilate was coming from the other side to confirm the power of the Roman Empire. And so the juxtaposition of Jesus, who had a processional of, poor, ordinary people behind him, whereas Pilate had a procession of armed military Roman soldiers behind him. Pretty dramatic. But I want to read the concluding paragraphs. Remember, Rome did not begin as an empire. It began as a republic. But over time, it ceded power to the few, tolerating cruelty, corruption, and the consolidation of control, so long as it came wrapped in the promise of peace and prosperity. The emperor became both ruler and redeemer, venerated not for moral clarity, but for the illusion of restored national greatness. The false promise offered to both Romans and the people they conquered was that Caesar was divine, a chosen one, a Lord. Today, Donald Trump is often cast in eerily similar terms by Christian nationalists, not as a moral leader, but as a figure who will deliver prosperity, protection, and cultural dominance, at least for a select few. To defy him in this worldview is not to reject a man, but to reject a kind of sacred order. That impulse is not new. It is as old as Pilate's procession. But Jesus never sought to replace Caesar with a Christian Caesar. He came to dismantle the very logic of Caesar, the belief that might makes right. Peace comes through violence, and politics is best wielded through fear, coercion, and control. Instead, he inaugurated a counter kingdom that aspires to loving kindness, radical welcome, mercy, and justice. A kingdom where the vulnerable and poor are lifted up and the idols of empire are exposed as frauds. So let's conclude this way, and then I want to hear your thoughts. I still believe our country will make it through this. I think we will come out the other side because our system is very resilient. It's going to be painful to get there, and there will be some damage before we begin the transition. But it will fail. It probably fall to generations after us to fix it, but it will be fixed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eddie. And anyone who has a question or a comment, please just raise your hand and I will bring the mic over to you.
I just wanted to speak from a woman's perspective. I'm hearing rumblings online that there may come a point where he tries to restrict the woman's vote by requiring women to have their maiden names on their identification. So that's something we need to keep our ear to the ground. I'm planning to go back to my maiden name anyway, but that would be a very simple way for them to restrict a lot of women from voting. So the other thing that I wanted to state is that if anybody is needing nature or a quiet place to come and get in touch with nature, Jeff and I would be happy to open our homes to you. Get in touch with us, okay?
Well, I don't think it's completely unrealistic that the administration would try to do something like that. So I'm not saying that's impossible. But you have to think about the way the system works. What the president has issued is a series of executive orders, and I've had occasion to read some of them. They're not like a regular executive order in the sense that, because I was involved in drafting a few executive orders at one time in my life. A traditional executive order states very clearly what the legal authority is for what is being done. And it states the procedural remedies for, or the procedure someone's going to go through, what the due process considerations are. These executive orders don't have that. And so if we ever see an executive order like that, it's just going to say, we think, I hear Donald Trump say that all women have got to use a certain name or something, or can't use their main name or whatever. That will immediately be challenged as a violation of equal protection and probably fundamental substantive due process privacy too. It will immediately be enjoined by a district judge, I'm sure. And then it will work its way up to the Supreme Court. And I think at that point, I'm still confident that there are the votes on the Supreme Court to say no to that. So the most extreme things you can imagine, I'm not ruling out the possibility they might occur, but I think the system is strong enough and built well enough to keep that from happening.
Sharon.
The interesting thing is that we're all in this together. Those who voted for him and those who did not were all affected by his decisions. And he, in looking at that, he's kind of violated everything I've ever learned about economics. And last week, the economy almost crashed in that the bond market went way down. That is our treasury bonds. That's the basis of our economies. And countries are starting to sell our bonds, our treasury bonds, which was at one time considered the safest investment in the world. And that's indicating that not only some of us, but the world leaders are losing faith in the United States as well. And my husband and I recently traveled to Ireland. We had a chance to talk to some citizens in a park, and they're very angry at the Americans. And I was trying to explain that although, as you said, 49.8% voted for Trump, the rest of us did not. Mm-hmm. The rest of us voted for someone else. So I'm having a little hard getting to the come by you part of all of this because I can see we have have long-term damage with the alliances throughout the world. It's good, and it takes a long time to build a reputation, very short time to destroy it. And we're in that process of doing that. So maybe you can help me to find a way to not worry about this because it's affecting our economy permanently. And it also affects the alliances we have in the world.
Well,
So-
I certainly agree with that. There are other checks and balances in the system that I think came into play last week. When the bond market begins to collapse, that is a very bad sign. That's a bad sign. And the weakness, it shows the weakness in the system, the framer system, because even though there are checks and balances to control the executive, they might take a long time to come into effect. If the president can order something immediately, the damage starts happening right then, instantly, and it might take a long time to correct it if you can. The other checks and balances, though, it may not give you much comfort, is there are a lot of rich people in this society who don't want that to happen either. And they are very powerful and they have a lot of influence. And if the president does listen to some of those people, and I think he does, they, I think, at least are a check against something that is so financially insane that it really destroys the economy. But there's no getting around it. He's going to do damage. He already has. So the issue is not whether the damage is going to be done. It has been done and it will continue to be done. Does it get so out of control that we're in the he's become like Pontius Pilate? Or can we control that and so that we can fix the damage someday? I'm in that second camp. I think that's going to happen. But the jury is still out on that, actually. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Eddie, it's been a great talk. I have a comment and a question. My comment is on the topic of the changing of names for women back to their maiden name, and whether or not the Supreme Court, if it were to reach that, would uphold that. I think we can tell ahead of time if Justices Alito, Thomas, Kavanaugh, if their wives start to change their name. Then we'll know what's going to happen at the Supreme Court. But in all honesty, the question is, you say that you are hopeful that if there is defiance of Supreme Court orders, that Congress will step in. What if that doesn't happen? What resolution, if any, is there legally that we can stop the disobedience of the Supreme Court's decisions?
Well, we've never run into that historically. Lincoln suspended habeas corpus during the Civil War when he probably didn't have the authority to do that. And it didn't cause a national crisis, but when you're in a civil war, you're already in a national crisis. So it probably wasn't a good test of the principle. Andrew Jackson defied the Supreme Court in moving Indian tribes, so it's not unprecedented historically. However, the very language Trump uses, he shows you he gets this idea that it's a big problem. And that's why I think he's very cautious about stepping over the line. And that's why I think the Justice Department goes to courts and say, well, we're working on it. We don't quite know where this guy is in El Salvador, and so forth. But if it comes, then the only remedy is the political remedy. And that means the 2026 elections, and that eventually means the 2028 elections. And that means Republicans speaking out in the Senate finally and saying no to this. And we're going to hold up certain legislation if we have to do that. Eventually it gets down to that. I hope we don't get there. But I can't deny that we have a big problem in the system if a president defies a Supreme Court order. It's just the system is built so that doesn't happen. And yeah.
I think we've never seen something, history has never seen something like this in the United States, except we did have this thing called Civil War, and that was pretty awful. The difference is that was history and this is now, and we're living through this, and none of us have ever lived through this before. I kind of remember the McCarthy hearings, but not really. Those had to have been terribly traumatizing for those people that were morally driven in our country at the time. So I think we do ride through it. We don't know, most of us in here may not see the outcome. The country will survive, whatever it looks like, it will survive. And I have enough faith in our grandchildren that they will, if they have to recreate something new, they will, and they will grow something even bigger and better. Doesn't mean that it doesn't break my heart. Cory Booker said, if the United States hadn't broken your heart now, you don't love your country. And I think that was part of his 25-hour. And that rang true to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I think our only solution, the courts will provide some relief, but the Supreme Court's not being as brave as we'd like for them to be in their wording. But I think we have to do two things. I think we do have to stay informed. Number one, because we are living through history. And this time right now will be recorded for, if history continues and the world continues, we are living through an incredibly interesting historical time. And if you can put it in that perspective and watch it and try to be dispassionate from that perspective, I just watch Rachel because Rachel, I can't watch a whole lot, but I can watch Rachel every night and learn a whole lot about what's going on. And I trust her more than anybody else to give us the truth. And I may not need to know all those other things, except that I could be died in the Social Security system one day because I'm out marching. And that could happen to me or to other people as well. It's going to happen whether we worry about it or not. But I think the single most important thing for all of us to do, remember Obama said, don't get angry, vote. And we've got to focus on that 2016 election is we cannot let voting rights be destroyed between now and 2016. We could fight Social Security. We could fight every one of those things that have happened. But don't you think that the most important thing for us to focus on as a nation right now is watching that like a hawk?
Yeah, I think, as I say, the ultimate remedy is a political one. And the first opportunity for that is in 2026. So we really have to be focused on that. Now, yeah, we could do that election over again. That would be fun if we could do that. If you are in a position of making a decision about whether to stand up to some of this or not, I think the lesson is you have to stand up to it. You have to stand up to it. My former law firm, Latham and Watkins, was one of the ones who rolled over and reached some agreement, and they are going to come to regret that. They are really going to come to regret that. And they had some short-term thing about, we're going to lose business and everything. But boy, in the long run, you're going to pay the mob when they come back, and want more. Most of us don't have to do that, don't have to make that decision. But I totally agree. 2026, and it's coming up. The whole point of this, and maybe I haven't accomplished anything, is to try to keep you from panicking and feeling so depressed all the time, because there are ways, to turn this around.
Ed, thank you very much for this talk. It was very helpful. I would just like to put on my view on how to get through this and think about it is, number one, I think you have to consider what your news sources are. And it helps to go in and check the background of that news source. I would say that the other thing good to do is unplug from the net, because that's usually not a good source.
Yeah.
But the other thing is learn how our system works and how it functions. Pick up, a copy. I don't know if they still teach civics anywhere, but pick up a civics book, or pick up a copy of the Constitution and read the Constitution, and then ask yourself, is that a reasonable thing? Yeah, the House is going to propose these crazy ideas. Will it pass the House? Yeah. What's the next step? What's the next step to it becoming a law? It's got to get through the Senate. All right. So you got to understand how the process is and how the system works, and read the Constitution. That doesn't make you a constitutional lawyer. It doesn't mean that the judges are always going to see it your way, but I think it helps take the edge off those hard issues.
Yeah, no, I agree. And let me say a word about the Supreme Court. I'm not real happy with the composition of the Supreme Court. There are three really good votes, from my personal point of view. There are two really bad votes. There's one pretty bad vote, and there are three sort of okay, middle of the road, maybe so votes. Kavanaugh, Roberts, and Barrett. I'm somewhat optimistic when it comes down to the real crunch. We're going to get two of those votes. I hope so.
Eddie?
Yeah.
Sobering. Being pragmatic and maybe paranoid. It seems that our salvation lies in midterm elections and the next presidential election, which all can be circumvented if martial law is declared.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could address how you,
Yes,
how you feel the courts and Congress will deal with that.
Yeah. First of all, no coup is successful unless the people lower down in the system follow the orders of the people leading the coup, So martial law means that the generals would comply, and then the troops further down the line will comply. I don't think that's going to happen. I really don't. Even with handpicked chairman of the Joint Chiefs and so forth. I mean, it's just, the system is resilient in that sense that you need a big buy-in from people you're commanding to make that happen. Yeah, it becomes civil war. Now, the problem with civil war is they've got all the guns. They got the big guns. They got the big guns. So we can't win a civil war fighting in the streets. I don't care what the Second Amendment people say. We don't have fighter planes, they might have AK-47s, but the other side has a bunch of fighter planes. So if we get to that point, that's despair, desperate situation. But there is a resiliency to the system. There's a feedback loop in the system that people rise up. That's why it's good to have a march. That's why it's good to protest. And maybe they don't hear you in little old Kilmarnock, but when there's 1,000 marches around the country, they will. So I don't know. In a way, I guess maybe I'm being optimistic. I just don't think that Trump will go there. And if he does, I don't think people will follow him. That he will need. They won't be there with him.
I've been having discussions with people, excuse me, about how the other side seems to be able to cheat and do things that they're not supposed to do, unconstitutional, et cetera, but we can't, we won't, or something like that. And I'm trying to figure out why that is. Why can't we set part of it aside anyway and say, and come up and say, you can't do this, or we're going to do it too, or something like that. I don't know.
I know what you mean. I think there's a general sense, and I think there's something to it that the left kind of fights with one hand tied behind their back, and follows the Marquess of Queensberry rules while the other side doesn't, and what's that all about? So I think there are ways to be tougher about that, but you can't go that next step. You can't say engaging in illegal acts, therefore we're engaging in illegal acts. You know, they're violating the Constitution, therefore we're going to violate the Constitution. It's just that is a road that leads to general lack of faith in the system. Everybody is doing it. Therefore, how do you rally your side based on some sense of the high ground? You don't have any high ground. So you can't go there, I don't think.
Well, Eddie, yeah, I am heartsick. That's the way I describe myself right now, because I had faith. And I admire your mind. I trust your mind. So you've given me some hope, because I trust your opinion and your thought process. I have hope, but I don't know how much faith I have. I don't have faith in the president. I don't have faith that he will stop at anything. And I don't really have faith in the Republican Party. I don't call them the Republicans. I call them the MAGA Party now. Because they have a lack of spine, complete lack of spine. I have some hope and faith in the Supreme Court, but you mentioned it. I have faith in the military. My father was in the military, and he was a good man, and I have faith in that tradition that he exemplified. And I don't care how many generals he replaced. They took an oath, and they really, I think, cherish that oath. And when push comes to shove, and it might come to that, they're gonna stand up for the Constitution.
I think so too. So we've already identified some checks in the system, you know. The military tradition, the courts, even the Supreme Court. The financial sector, even though they're a bunch of greedy whatever, they stand as a check into something that will destroy the economy. And then we have the 2026 elections coming up. So there are things to hold on to. Okay, anybody else? Okay, guys, thanks a lot. Oh, did you have something you want to say?
Yes. Good morning, Eddie, and thank you so much for this morning's discussion. I would like to know your views about the Electoral College. Are you for it or against it?
I'm against it.
Okay.
The problem is it's in the Constitution. Here's how you have to amend the Constitution. You have to get 2/3 of the Senate, 2/3 of the House, and 3/4 of the states, including all those little states who are guaranteed 3 electoral votes. So it's a stupid idea. We're stuck with it. It won't ever change probably, but we'll just have to start winning elections in little states, you know, get their electoral votes.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Concern that most of you don't have, but I do want to speak for my group.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's kind of easier for me, a straight white man, you know, to say, what's he going to do to me? But if you're a member of a community that's been trampled on, can't do it.
Write checks to the ACLU.